Today we are going to talk about English as a global language. In this lecture, we are to dwell upon the following points. What is a global language? Why is global language needed? What are the main drawbacks of global language domination? What is a global language and is English a global language? Is English appropriate as a global language? What is the future of English as a global language? And why is English widely used in business? We'll start with the definition. A global language is a language that is used internationally in written and spoken communication, and that is characterized not only by a number of native speakers, but also the second language speakers, and by its geographical distribution and the use of international organizations and diplomatic relations. A global language acts as a lingua franca, that is, a common language that enables communication between nations. Historically, a global language is the language that is spoken by those who have power. To understand better why we consider English to be a global language, we'll go back to the history of the United Kingdom. More than 1,000 years ago, the British Isles were inhabited by Celtic speakers. And as you can see from the map, the British Isles, the parts of the British Isles were inhabited by these Celtic speakers, and they still survive in some parts of the United Kingdom, in Scotland, Wales, Northern Ireland, and in province of France, Brittany. The first invaders of the British Isles were Romans. They came to the country in 43 before Christ and ruled up to 410 Anno Domini. They spoke Latin, and Latin was the language of the government. It was the language of military Romans, and it was the language later on, it was the language of the Catholic Church. So it gained the status of a global language, but it quickly lost its status after the Roman Empire collapsed. The next invasion was Anglo-Saxons. Anglo-Saxons arrived in the country in the 4th century Anno Domini, and they arrived from what is now Germany, Holland, and Denmark. And they spoke Germanic language, that is the basis of modern English. The Vikings invaded the country in the 8th century. They came from what is now Norway and Denmark. The Scandinavian speakers spoke Old Norse, and it was related to Anglo-Saxon, the parent language of modern Danish. There was a mixing of two languages by that time that greatly enriched the English vocabulary. The Norman invaders arrived into the country in 1066. They were French-speaking, and by that time, 3 languages had coexisted. French was the language of government and aristocracy. English was the language of poor people, and Latin was used in churches. So their leader of the Normans was William, Duke of Normandy. He was the first Norman king of England, whose nickname was William the Conqueror. So modern English evolved from mingling of 3 tongues, French, Germanic, and Latin. And English is half Germanic due to Vikings and Anglo-Saxons, and half Roman from French and Latin. There are, however, considerable borrowings in the language. As you can see from the pie chart, most of the loans and borrowings, about 80%, are of Germanic, Latin, and French origin, and only 20% come to other languages. In this slide, you can see a list of the languages. From each English borrowed a lot of words. They are Old English, Old Norse, German, French, Spanish, Italian, Arabic, Latin, Dutch, Hindi, Turkish, Japanese, Malay, Hungarian, Greek, Russian, Finnish, Portuguese, Farsi, and some others. So the main factors that make a language global are the number of countries that use English as the first language, a mother tongue, the number of countries that adopt English as their official language, the number of countries teaching English at colleges, schools, and universities. The next factor is richness of the vocabulary. And finally, the quality of the literature throughout the history that is associated with great cultures and religions. So global language is needed, firstly, for communications and technologies, then for global trade, for easy traveling, international traveling, and to be used in international organizations such as the United Nations, the European Union, the World Bank, the International Monetary Fund, the World Health Organizations, and many others. For many years, scientists have been trying to invent some artificial languages. They made it in an attempt to promote mutual understanding and to establish peace and unity between nations. And one of the examples is the artificial language called Esperanto. It has only 16 rules, no definite articles, no irregular endings, and no illogical spelling. However, there are some drawbacks of global language domination. There is the risk that a global language can lead to weakening of the minority languages, and some scientists even fear that minority languages can disappear. And it is estimated that up to 80% of the world's 6,000 or so living languages may die out within the next century. Natural speakers of the global language may be at an unfair advantage over those who speak it as the second or the third language. Language domination can be also seen as a threat to freedom of speech and to the ideals of the multiculturalism. We consider English to be a global language as it is widely spoken all over the world, and many scientists have established English as lingua franca in many fields: business, education, science, computing, transportation, politics, and entertainment. And it's estimated that 85% of international organizations have English as an official language. And about 1/3 of international organizations, including such organizations as OPEC or EFTA, use English only. And almost 90% of Asian international organizations use English. Another reason is that political and economic power of native speakers of English, British and Americans, is quite evident nowadays, and we can see that Americans dominate in many spheres of human life, in cinematography, in business, in finance, computing, especially in the internet, in developing international markets, in tourism, advertising, and many others. In this graph, you can see the percentage of European Union populations who claim to speak English. And on the top there is the Netherlands. It takes about 80%. Then comes Sweden, Denmark, Luxembourg, Finland, Austria, Belgium, Germany, Greece, France, Italy, Portugal, and finally Spain, the least percentage, 20%. There are some essential features that make English a global language. The first is richness of the English vocabulary. The largest dictionary in the world, Oxford English Dictionary, lists about 650,000 English words in 20 volumes. Officially, this is the largest dictionary in the world. And if we add some technical terms and scientific words, it will amount over 1 million. And it is estimated that about 200,000 English words are in common use, compared to German, for example, they use only 180, and in France they use only 100,000. So we can say that English is a flexible language. If we take, for example, word order, English adverbs are quite flexible, and we can use the same phrase in active and passive, and we can use as well one word as a noun and a verb, for example, a drink, to drink, a purchase, to purchase. And of course we can use a lot of prefixes and suffixes for word formation. English grammar is generally simpler than many other languages. No genders as in German, and case forms are almost non-existent, with the exception of some pronouns, personal pronouns. And compared to Finnish, for example, which have 15 forms for every noun, or Russian, which have 12 forms. English verbs, for example, have only 5 forms. Look at the example: ride, rides, rode, riding, ridden. And sometimes they have even 3 forms: hit, hits, hitting. And in Germany, each verb has 16 different forms, and in Latin it's possible 120. However, some linguists claim that English pronunciation and spelling can be quite challenging due to the exception to the rules. English translations are generally concise compared to other languages, except Hebrew. Hebrew translations appear to be extremely concise. The extent and quality of English literature enables English to gain the status of a global language. As for the future of the English language, there are some different options for that. Some countries, especially the former British colonies, fear that English is the tool of enslaving the nations, and they are against imposing English. Some scientists claim that even if the United States lost its position as an economic and technical dominance, and new dominant language may replace English, it may be Chinese, or it is called also Mandarin. It's likely, but we think it's impossible in the nearest future due to the 2 main reasons. The first, English has been extensively spread and promoted since the 16th century. And the second reason is that Chinese or Mandarin is difficult to learn to most of the nations. Population growth may appear to be a crucial factor as well. And if you take, for example, ex-Hispanic population of the United States, it is expected that it is expected to increase from about 16% today to around 30% by 2050. And it may, of course, considerably weaken the position of English as a global language. According to the British Council report, the number of people learning English is likely to increase in the nearest 10 or 15 years, and it will amount about 2 billion people. And after that, a slight decline is predicted. Linguists have been trying to invent so-called controlled English, suitable for international usage, and they called it basic English, plain English, globish, international English, special English. But none of them has become global because they have no historical, cultural, and economic background. We think that in the 21st century, English is sure to dominate as a global language. Nevertheless, the long-term future of English as a global language probably lies in the hands of Asia and the countries with a huge or dense population such as India or China. So we are going to consider why English is widely used in international business. English is used in written communication as well as in oral communication, and if you take written communication, we can speak about different reports, faxes, memos, notes, and annual reports as well, and writing business letters or emails. And for oral communication, English is used at presentation, negotiations, meeting, conferences, even when dealing with suppliers, entertaining clients, and accepting overseas visitors. And of course, speaking over the phone. Experts in business English, Ipsos Global Public Affairs, being aware of the fact of the globalization, conducted a poll where they surveyed 16,344 employees in 26 countries. And the results revealed that the countries that commonly use English when communicating with counterparts abroad are the most percentage takes China, 63%, then comes India, Singapore, and Saudi Arabia, 50%, and the least is Spain, only 5%. And if you take the average figure in 26 countries, it amounts to 25%. So there are three reasons why English has become a corporate standard. Most companies adhere to English-speaking policy, and so businessmen have to communicate in English to enable cooperation and to establish new markets, to find new markets, and to find new markets entry. In multinational companies, language differences can cause problems. When employees work together, they have to meet common corporate goals, and they have to communicate and use one common language. And we can give the example of a Swiss food giant, Nestle. That company enforced English as a company standard, and thus they increased their efficiency. Cross-cultural integration is notoriously tricky. In case of a merger or acquisition of international companies, English can be chosen as a golden middle to avoid cultural clashes and disputes in the terms of language policy. The example can be a modern pharmaceutical company, Aventis. This is the 5th largest company in the world, and it was the result of a merger of a British and, German and French company. And the new firm chose English as a corporate standard to avoid playing favorites. So to sum up, we should admit that English is sure to retain its status as a global language in the nearest future, because it's widely used in most spheres of human life and due to the dominant political and economic position of its native speakers, American and British. Thank you very much for your attention. See you next time.